Before we get into laboring, I just wanted to show you what I was up to this weekend. It was actually funny. So this was like, my birthday was a week long, by the way. It took me a week to birth. So I went on like a glamping adventure with my best friend Amanda, also my roommate. And so we went to the Shenandoah Mountains. Why am I standing up? We went to the Shenandoah Mountains, and we stayed in this like fancy tent that was like set up for us. So it was like we went camping, but there was like a nice bed and like this big hut. And it was like Airbnb for tents. It's called Tenter. And so it was really nice. And we went to this private nature resort that had like a waterfall, and it had all of this cool shit. And it was just owned by this one dude, colonized the lands of public use anyway. That was fun. It's actually funny because yesterday I didn't do any work in the past 3 days. So I got to class yesterday, in the first 15 minutes I was like finishing up thing. But today I actually prepared something. So, making coffee. I bring my drip coffee set, the same one that I have at home, to all my camping trips. You got to live the life when you're out there, you know. And then we had a big mushroom float, and so that's a waterfall. And so this was so much fun. The water was so clear and beautiful, and because it was like fancy and private, there was no one there, so got to get away from everyone. And then I've been giving Amanda my camera, and so we've just been taking photos and whatever. I was filming, and she was taking photos, and so this is a really funny photo because it looks like I'm holding a bubble. Like, isn't that crazy? Crazy timing. When you're out taking photos, just bam, 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 bam. You never know what you're gonna get. You know, put your shutter speed at like 6,000. Splash some water. It's great. Akila was having a great time, running around. She is a water baby. She loves swimming. She was swimming the entire time. And then this is Freya, Amanda's dog. And so, super epic. Excuse me. Okay. Okay, so I was being irresponsible. And I was like, oh, there's a waterfall. I want to go take some video of it. But this waterfall was behind this cave that you had to swim into. So I was like, I'm going to take my camera swimming. And so luckily this tripod can handle it because it was completely submerged. And then I was like, nothing's going to happen. Then I started sinking. And and then Amanda came over to my face as if she was going to help me. And I was like, help me, help me. She was like, just kidding, I'm going to take photos. And I'm like, wait, actually, this photos are really cool, but also help me. And then I dropped like one of those little mics in there. Kind of a bummer. But it was worth the photos. I mean, these are priceless, you know. And then the actual photos of the waterfall and me filming stuff. I am going to work with my friend Jack, and he's going to edit this film together. I was like, I got to get myself a birthday gift, so I'm paying Jack to get me an original Jack Hoffman edit. But it was so relaxing. Freya is like a cow. She loves grazing. Grass is bad for dogs. Don't give dogs grass. Like, she chokes and then burps, but she was looking like a queen. A little flower crown over here, living her best life. Amanda in the little float. Cheesing. Ooh. And just like Akila runs around the class like crazy, I was running around this waterfall area like crazy. It was so fun. And then I didn't learn my lesson. I was like, let's do it again. So, oh man, there was like a waterfall in the forest, and then you travel outside the forest, and there was this wide open plain. But the waterfall like continued down this little section. So we would, you know, when there's like water, it was like a fancy water park. You know, water parks that have like really long winding waterways, and you just sit and float. That's what we did. We started at the top with this mushroom float, and then we kind of like drifted all the way down So that's really cool. You'll see more of it when I have a chance to put together the movie. But it was so fun. And look at this mountainscape. And I was like, take a behind the scenes photo. And she was like, I've been taking photos of you. Okay. And then here's baby. We were just practicing taking photos with high shutter speed and trying to get like the water to splash in a cool way. So I was just for like an hour getting Akila to like jump, jump, jump. And then at the end she was exhausted. She was like, no more. And she turned into a tiny little donut, a doggy donut. She was so small, it was adorable. Akila just keeps going and doesn't realize she's getting tired. And then at the end, she just is limp, no longer a functioning animal. And then we went back to the tent. That's our little tent over here. And then Akila just collapsed. And he was like, please give me attention. Here's a photo of Akila looking like a Pokemon. And then I was like, I got to join in on the fun. So I did a Patrick Starfish in the air. It's funny because this looks like, wow, this is a big jump. But the next photo, the water was like this shallow. So I was like, wee! And then I would end up like. So it looks cool because I am just showing you this photo. But the next one was me just like, it was very anticlimactic. But it was fun. And then so this is probably my favorite photo. We were just jumping over and over and over. And then I was splashing Akila. And she was looking like a vicious monster. And so yeah, that is what I was doing for my birthday. And so I encourage you to take one of these classes and plan a trip with your friends to go. Maybe nature is your thing. Maybe you like shopping. I don't care what it is. Do something fun. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to make anything because you're not inspired. So do that. Ooh, what are we doing today? So today we're going to talk about transitions and work on your logos. That was kind of like homework. We'll have time for that in class. But then I'll also talk about how to structure kind of your motion identity systems, right? It's not just the logo that you're making it move. We also want to consider all of the aspects of our values or the skills we want to visualize in this animation, right? It doesn't just communicate, hey, we have a logo. It communicates, here's what I do. Here's who I am. Here's what I'm good at. So that's what we'll be talking about today. So first we're going to be doing this. I'm going to show you a bunch of inspiration. I'm going to show you a case study of a project that I'm working on right now, an identity project. And then we're doing like a little activity all together in class. And this is the time for you to do whatever work you need to get done on your projects, or hang out with the Xbox, or do what you need to do. And then after that, I would like to meet with all of you individually. And so while you guys are doing your thing, whatever you're doing, we're going to call you out one by one in the hallway and take a photo of you, so that for next class, I'm going to print all of your headshots. And then in class, we're going to make a little like personal portrait stop motion animation. And so I'll elaborate more on that when we get to it. But basically today is inspo, a little activity. I don't really have a technical demo because I really want to focus on the design stuff. But technical demo is next week. And I was going to tell you something. I forgot. I'll remember at some point. Okay, so that's it. Thank you all for coming. So let's look at some cool stuff. Bam. Okay, so this is oddfellows.tv. That's like, it's a motion design studio. And so a lot of the websites I'm going to show you and the videos I'm going to show you are studios that specialize in creating motion design identities. So it's not just like, if you're a motion designer, not just you're going to be creating one-off video for some social media thing or whatever. These studios specialize in creating brand identities that are moving.
looking at color, typography, and photography and how that all harmonizes with the white space. So it's about symbiosis, harmony, and unity. A layout or a cover becomes legendary when it captivates the eye and mind. I do think when something is clear, concise, a little bit of complexity, and also creating something that feels new does create success in the layout design. Every platform has its own function, and therefore they each have to communicate an idea or a message or a story or an article, but each platform has a different level of attention span. So you have to take into mind your overall breadth and tone and use that approach across the board, across platform. If you can create an image that emotionally speaks to your target and you've made them connect with the content somehow, then I feel like it's 100% success. Thinking about type, color, imagery, and the design of a layout all have to work cohesively. Finding that right balance of each of those elements is key, and one can be more powerful than the others. However, it needs to serve a purpose and make sense. And it's really a beautiful thing when if you look at those elements separately, they're one thing, but then when you combine them with those other components, it becomes something else.
Wow, stunning. Is it going? Okay.
A conductor of an artist show.
I really love how this video shows off the entire process, like their design process. And so I know last time I was like, oh, make a logo, right? But even to me, logos are terrifying, right? That's almost like a summary. That's a culmination of stuff after you figured out what you want to do, right? When I do a logo project, it's like a month, and the logo is what I create on the last day. I have to do background research and figure out the contents and elements I want to include in my designs, and then eventually I'll figure out what is that summary, right? The logo is like, I don't know, if you're thinking about English class, like your thesis statement, or it's like the final mark that represents everything that you've been researching. And so what we'll do in the class activity today is we'll kind of work backwards, right? We'll start, like last time our activity was, let's just write down a bunch of skills that we have. Let's write down a bunch of values that we have, right? Because these things will inform our identity, our branding, our logo, how we apply this style consistently to whatever deliverables. And so I don't even think we can really get to a logo before we've done any research, right? But today we'll take kind of the notes we made and kind of planning we did from last week and start visualizing those things. And eventually we might end up at a logo, right? We might end up at a mark. So I like to work backwards. I mean, I'll elaborate. This is stunning. And this is also how I approach when I create style frames. So first I do planning for an animation, then I create a rough storyboard. What is the sequence of events? And then I create style frames, basically applying my creative direction inspiration to the frames, and then I know what I want to animate and how I want to animate it, right? It's not just like I immediately hop into After Effects and start fucking around with buttons. Not how I do it. I can't work that way. So I think this is beautiful. Transitioning personalities. And what we'll highlight today is, because you know how to design, all right? That's nothing new to you. What's important in motion design is how do you tell a consistent story, right? It's not just a point about what is the start of your animation, what is the end of it. It's about how do we get from idea to idea? How do we transition from one to the other, right? And in that transition, how can we continue to tell that story? How can we, through animation, whether it's slow or fast or choppy or smooth, that tells a certain kind of story, and that gives us personality. So let's look at some inspiration. And so this is a mix of 2D and 3D and a bunch of stuff, you know? And so the technical is great, and you're like, how do I do that? But that's not really what I'm expecting. I hope that you look at these and you kind of pay attention to how do we travel from one scene to the other. That was it. I just got comfortable. I was about to grab my popcorn. Let's watch it again. And I think this is really cool because it's so elaborate and not just 2D or 3D, it's like a combination of everything. The focus is really on just, it's an art piece. It's about the story. So if we go back, this, let's say like something like this is one style frame, right? You might doodle, okay, I want the fifth coming towards the camera. And then the next style frame is this. And then your question is, how do I get from one scene to the other, right? And that's where they do the animation magic, right? And it makes it look seamless. And I was always intimidated by this kind of transitional stuff because I'm like, holy shit, how do I do that? But it all comes down to planning, for me at least. Like when I think about my process, I have to know point A and point C before I can even start to consider B. And then the logo here doesn't show up until the end, right? So, and that's not even the focal point of the animation. A logo doesn't have meaning until you give it meaning. A mark doesn't mean anything until you embellish it with reasons why people should care. Ooh, let's look at this one. I was thinking of Yulu. This is some cool 3D shit. This is like animation awards or something. And so what's really nice about this is like the logo at the end, if you saw this out of context, you would be like, what is this shit? Like this is nothing. But because the trailer was so hype, you're like, okay, this is like a 2D flat version of the whole 3D thing they're going for, right? So you gotta put it in context. Something else that I really love about this is, yes, every scene is like its own world. It's entirely different, but there's a consistent character in it, the circle. The sphere and the circle, the roundness of everything, right? So in every shot, they're somehow incorporating either a circle, like a 2D, or round edges, right? Like tubes that are going. Ma'am. And so there's not one consistent like color palette, but the form alone kind of represents the thread that ties all of these ideas together. Circles here, sphere here, right? And look at that, oof, oof. Look at that reflection. I mean, we'll dedicate a whole class to this, but like camera movement. When we're moving the camera, it has to be intentional. What new information are we revealing when we're pinning the camera, right? If you're on TikTok or whatever, you see all these dudes like that's pointless. No, it's not pointless. I love creativity. Everyone should be creating. But I think the more intentional you are with your camera movements, if you are doing camera, if not, ignore this, it's got to continue telling a certain story, right? And so there's these really cool hyperlapses of these like infinitely zooming videos where people go through doorways and into a new world. Like, that's sick. We're continuing to tell a story and like surprising the viewers. And so this shot especially, probably my favorite in the whole thing, it's like bloop. It's This is almost like the logo, right? This is the circular element that ties everything together. And so in the reflection of it, just so well done. And then what's so cool, and like here, we have the sphere again. And so I love motion graphics isn't just about how can we make a circle move, right? But how are you presenting the same thing in a new way by combining video, by combining textures, by combining 2D and 3D that keeps it interesting. Like here, it's like this weird, it starts abstract. It's like weirdly morphing and stuff. It's almost reminiscent of if you like scan something with a scanner and like shake it while it's scanning, right? Because this probably has to do something with film, that's relevant. That's part of continuing that story. And then eventually this becomes the cylinder, right? It looks like a rectangle, but because of context, we know that this is actually a cylinder. Oh, look at those water movements. And so I'm not saying incorporate 3D, okay? But I know a lot of people in here do have experience with like cinema. And so this is dope, but it's not complex in terms of animation. This one scene, it's just a cylinder floating up. This one scene is just two circles coming together, pooping out a little circle, you know? This scene is just like, if you know cinema, like a deformer applied to a shape, and then it's just moving. You know, it's not complex at all. And it doesn't have to be complex for it to be meaningful. Because this is so well planned and everything is so consistent, like this isn't even an animation of anything but the light and the rotation of this object, right? And like even this is just a sculpture with moving light. But all together, it makes this beautiful arrangement, this beautiful like orchestra. And here, we got tiny little spheres. Big sphere. I love these shots. Ma'am, Akira, come over here. Can you sit down? She's like, no, I'm too antsy. Okay. Oof, love it. Ma'am, Akira, can you hold the kilo back? Sorry. Akira, come over here. Sorry. Akira. She's not an intruder. That's inappropriate. Ooh, okay. Okay. We're all right, baby. Come over here. Come over here. Stay right there. No way. Akila, can we not? Okay, I'm distracted now. I'm going to put you on a leash. Come here. Come here, baby. Let's calm down. Okay, here we go. Okay, this next one, also an award thing for motion design, the Motion Awards. Every year, I think it's Motionographer or just a bunch of organizations host the Motion Awards. And every year they have this cool-ass trailer that's made by a ton of animators and designers.
It's time to step up to the plate, to rise to the top, to walk the walk, and talk the talk. Because when you're on top, the taste of success is so sweet. The smell of midnight oil, a distant memory. It's your time to shine, to be the cream of the crop, with the mother of all ideas. In it to win it, and win it you will, because you're no one-trick pony, no flash in the pan, no phony. Because rain or shine, it's your time to take the gold.
Akira, stop. Sit. Sit. Ooh. Ah. So this one, the shapes themselves, the objects have literally nothing in common. I think They probably had a room of like 20 artists, and somebody prompted everyone, make a 3-second animation with some random shit just showing off like cool tech, you know? But what's consistent about it is the color. What's consistent about it is the pacing, the rhythm, right? You see a lot of patterns, like multiples of things. Just a lot of flashiness. And so the literal things on the screen don't have to be uniform for it to feel like one piece. And then at the end, we get that logo reveal, where it's like bringing it back to the 2D context. The 3D thing, and then the 2D thing. Nice. Me. So I think this is like some wholesome thing about a dad and his son or something. Too much reading. I'm not going to do all that. I'm just going to watch. Are we? Here we go. Come over here. Oh, ew. stunning. So this is a whole ass animation. And it's not like I'm expecting you to make a whole ass animation. But if you stop frame by frame, you can kind of pick out individual animations that they made one at a time, and then they just layered it together. So when you're designing your storyboards or style frames, do your thing, but also think about what could be in the foreground that might be interesting. What's my main subject? What does my background look like? And when you layer things together, it starts to become very seamless. Like this opening shot, for example. Oh. This is a background animated separately. And then they glued this animation over top of it, right? And then they glued these little pixels flickering over top of it, right? And so not everything has to be hand-drawn. There's a lot of tools in After Effects that are like, oh, pixel wipes, pixel transitions, right? But as long as you layer stuff, it looks big. It looks seamless. Like that sells your story. That allows us to focus on the bigger picture instead of just, oh, this is a cool effect. I'm not able to think about the technical process here because I'm so just entranced into this world. And like this in the background, right? It almost looks like it's the camera, but they probably just added a blur effect in After Effects over top of this to simulate the depth, right? How can we fake it? This character is reacting to this crystal sphere, right? But this animation is probably on a separate layer than this dude. But because they planned it out beforehand, they knew that they wanted those two to interact, right? So the more you plan, the more seamless things can seem because you can consider the outcome of something before you even make it. Like these squares and these spheres are probably on completely different layers. And so are the little pixel explosions. And in terms of the color palette, it's just super consistent. In terms of the prisms and the geometric nature of the shapes, that's super consistent. Love it. Oh, this is the good stuff. This is my favorite stuff. And so this is probably more motion design. Like if you go into the design world and you're doing a job as a motion designer, you're probably going to be working on stuff like this. I mean, not probably. This is like really up there. This is Buck.co. I love them. But that's like a very large studio. But this is the stuff I'd like to do. And so what this project did is that they are putting together a motion design for some science, for a product. And like hearing that, I'm like bored by it. But the way that they approached it was so about how you feel about these things. They're talking about genetics. They're talking about solving humanity's problems and things like that. And it's super abstract.
Dreams. You take us places we've never been. Show us things we've never seen. Dreams let us reimagine the world we live in. There's a power inside us that can make dreams come true. The power of the genome. We found a way to unlock that power so you can answer life's biggest questions. Can you find a cure for every kind of cancer? Can disease stop being an inheritance? How can everyone live not just longer, but healthier? These answers are written just 4 letters. We live in a time that is brighter than ever before. And this is just the beginning. Introducing the NovaSeq X series. Our most innovative sequencer is here. This is the genome era.
Oh, chills. When I think of like science motion graphic, I'm like, oh shit, this is going to be complicated, right? This is going to be, I have to make diagrams of like a camera running through blood vessels and seeing like, I get these stereotypical image on my brain because I watch Netflix, right? And so how can you be prompted with something and formulate an idea but move past that idea? Like, yes, when you first get prompted with a design prompt, write down the obvious things so that you can look back at them and move past them, right? I am going to do little doodles of blood vessels and whatever. And then I'm going to be like, well, everyone does that. Also, my computer cannot handle that because my computer's not made for 3D rendering. So how do I tell the same story in a way that my computer can handle and also that is colorful and rich and new? And it doesn't have to be as flashy as like the Motion Awards animation that I showed you for it to be impactful. This is so much more memorable than that Motion Awards kind of rendering cool shit, you know? And that was probably because they're showing off technical, because 3D is very technical, right? This isn't about 3D animation. This isn't about 2D. This is about science, humanity. And like, oh, look at this transition, right? It starts like 3D, and it warps, and with gradation, they are hinting towards the depth that you end up in through this tunnel. And then this part, it starts abstract, but then it shows off a whole array of like these genomes. This is something my computer can handle. I love this. Like, this transition is incredible. Little illuminations, and then it starts splicing it up into little columns. Not only that, then it gets, this is super trippy. Like, bzzz, like this is crazy. And it's a constant, I love how dynamic this is. So when you're telling a story, it's not just what animations are going on. It's like, how are you moving the camera, or not even thinking about cameras, thinking about how is the image just abstract and colorful? Then how do we, like, it's like a zoom up close-up shot of like a vein or something. And how do you zoom out and see like the fibers of it, like this, like well, I don't know, it's not fibers, tubes, whatever, you get what I'm saying, right? Starts out with just colors and shapes, and it keeps moving back. It's so dynamic, because first you're being shown something literal, and then you're being shown something abstract. And so that camera movement is also a way to like cheat the transitions. Like, you want to make it not obvious, I did this in After Effects. I think that's the coolest thing. When you don't even think about the tools, and you're just like, holy shit, how did they create this? That's the best. GitHub. Oh my God, this is triggering. GitHub, software engineers. I work for this tech company, and anyway. But I love how they made this.
What do you mean, what is GitHub? It's the largest, most complete development platform in the world. Millions of developers use it. And it's not just developers. These days, every company is a software company. I thought you might say that. Come on, let me show you. GitHub is an enterprise transforming, startup launching, community driven, super secure, open source championing, cloud-based platform. It's where the world builds software.
We created algorithms.
And global businesses.
We even went to Mars.
Or at least our code did.
Oh, yes. With GitHub, anything is possible. But how? Say this is Sanam, a senior software engineer, and this is a team's project on GitHub. Sanam and the team can create their own branches of code to work together in parallel.
This is my branch, an alternate timeline where I can build, squash bugs, and safely experiment. There are communication and task delegation tools right next to my code. So when we're ready to merge, we merge instantly.
It works with thousands of branches for over 1 million projects.
Look at this cute little rubber ducky who keeps showing up. And whether it's physically on his desk, or it's in 3D space, or it's in 2D space, that's our main character. In this scene, you think it's 3D, but it's not. Or, I don't know, I didn't make it. But I could see us breaking all of these pieces down into individual 2D animations, and then at the end we go into After Effects and type in bulge effect, and then we just make it look like it's 3D, right? And because it's transitioning so seamlessly to this scene, it looks 3D. But this is without even doing any 3D stuff. I like this because it starts out very literal, very illustrative, very technical. And then it goes to like this abstract grid. There's like this push and pull of the camera from abstract to literal. Now it's completely literal. It's like a meme. It's funny. And then we go to like pushing and pulling. This looks 3D. It's probably 3D in After Effects, but not using any fancy 3D programs. And I love that it goes from 2D animation to 3D. It's putting together all of this mixed media to give you this seamless story, right? In live footage, like what can you accomplish with all the tools? You only have like 3 weeks to do a project. How can I take advantage of my camera and then the scanner and then After Effects so that it is minimal technical work, but it is driving my concept? And so if you plan your concept out carefully, you can figure out these practical details before you start producing. I've linked these on our presentation, and they have like breakdowns of everything, of like the style frames and everything, kind of their process. So I think this is worthwhile to look at. See, but it starts out with planning. The more planning you do, the more prepared you'll be come production time. Ooh. Buck coming through once again. Here we go. This is super abstract. Man, as much as I hate meta, this logo animation, it just starts as this coil and then it goes into this 2D shape. These colors, these gradients are beautiful. And so those are the obvious things tying things together. But if you pay attention to the transitions and think about meta as the concept of it's our real world with the digital world, right? Whether we're on Instagram, whether we're on our computer, whether we're on our phones, right? The transitions themselves are almost like representing the dimensions of those screens, right? So not only are the animations and the renderings really cool, it's like swapping from one to the other. It's almost as if you're swapping from one device to the other, right? And so that's why those transitions are kind of reinforcing those concepts in very subtle ways that people don't even notice. Stunning. And right, sometimes you're going really up close to something, then you're pulling really far back. And it's like this integration of, at the end, it's like type and, like right here. Is it right here? Here we go, like this. Stunning. Oh, I think this is where they show off all the stuff. Look at that type and 3D combination. All the pieces coming together. And so what really helped me try to stay consistent and plan for a motion design piece is to very first think of what are the technical elements I want to include. What are all the pieces of the puzzle, right? I'm making a puzzle, essentially. And all the little puzzle pieces are moving. How do they come together? What are my puzzle pieces? What am I using for text? What am I using for image? How am I transitioning from one to the other? Planning. Like what animation studios do a lot of times, they make the full animation in just black and white. So your focus is purely formal. And then later on, they start introducing color and texture and light, right? These are what inspired the colors. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they went to cinema and they just had a spotlight set up and then they put this in front of the light so the light shines through this as like a filter, you know? So it looks complex, but if you break it down, it's something you could easily achieve. I mean, yes, it takes time. This is probably 6 months, if not more, worth of work, right? This is a studio of 20 animators and designers. You got, what, 3 weeks for a logo animation? But I'm saying you can do it. This is almost as if I am in the woods looking at water rippling, or like looking at grass in the leaves, right? Meta is tech online, but they're making it feel like you're in a garden. So much good stuff. Right, and now this is how it applies to the website. This is I feel like for me, motion design is literally just the start of creating a consistent visual, and then you can apply it to anything, whether it's social media or website, whatever. And when you show clients this, then they're like, oh shit, we're not just gonna hire you for an animation, we want you to do everything, you know? And that's how you kind of present your value. It's like, it's not even about, I am a graphic designer, it's I am an artist and I can tell the story in a cohesive way. I can have a conversation with someone in 30 seconds that will take you 50 minutes in a PowerPoint presentation. That's why you need me. Last one. And this one really breaks it down. I love Vucco.co. Their motion identity kind of situation. Very sophisticated, very thought out. And seeing this, I used to be like, oh shit, I gotta consider all of these things when making a motion design piece. No. I just am in the shower and I am working on an animation and I'm like, oh cool, this is what would look like on a website. I'll do a little sketch somewhere, and then at the end of the 3 months when I'm done with the project, I'll be like, this is what a website would look like, right? These pieces don't have to be linear in how you put them together. You don't have to consider all of the pieces before you start working. Just start doodling and things will fall into place. And then document your process throughout. So by the end, you can be like, oh, I already thought about the social media, what that looks like. I already thought about what it looks like vertical on a phone. And here it breaks down the process. And it's super simple, the logo reveal, right? But the logo reveal has a couple things going for it. not only obviously is the logo, it flashes with that purple, right? It has a certain pacing, a certain expression. It's not just a linear animation. It's like whoosh, right? That all adds character. Now we're incorporating 2D and 3D. We're going from there was one transition where we went from like one circle to like a whole map, right? Pushing and pulling, starting abstract, going literal. Thinking about type treatments. And so I think in this project, or for most projects for this class, I'd like this to be one thing, like one style of animation you make, where you're showing how your brand applies to a square format, a vertical format, and a horizontal format. This is a great example. What does it look like mocked up on a billboard? This is the stuff people understand. If you show a client an animation, they're going to have a million questions. If you show people a mock-up, they're going to have no questions. You know, it's annoying when people are like, I don't like this color. They're not going to ask you that if you thoroughly break down your concept and your reasoning. If you've documented what little doodles you put on sticky notes, and then you show that in the meeting, they're going to be like, wow, this is it. They are not creative. They cannot see it any other way. And so if you lay out a full picture, they're not going to question you. And I think it's important to have that confidence, but to also hear people. When somebody is like, I think this, yes, and I agree with you, maybe we could try this. You know, be easy to work with. You know, the more receptive you are to them, the more receptive they'll be of you. You know, when I work with someone and I show them the whole kit, they never question me again. They never ask me if I'm working. They let me go. They trust me. It's like a trust thing. You know, the more insight you give about your thinking and your perspective, the more trust you'll gain. And the more vacations you can go on, and the less labor you will have to do. And instead of, I know that I can make an animation in a week, okay, but I'm going to tell them a month. So I get paid for a month, and I get 3 weeks of vacation. Like, play the game. They're playing games with you. That's how you do it. That's your superpower. You can make shit look big. You can make a company look like $1 million, even though they're 2 people. That's your superpower. I'm going to do a little more yapping, and then we're going to do a little activity to hopefully mitigate the amount of labor you have to do at home. So I'm working with this organization called You Got to Move. And this organization, it's an educational, like an online educational institution that teaches students, teachers, and communities how to become activists. And so they do that through teaching civil rights. And a lot of what they're teaching is based off of the civil rights documentaries that this artist called Lucy, who I'm working with, has been creating since the 60s. So very interesting, something I actually care about. And so I actually got this gig because Christian was like, yo, Leon should do this. And then they're like, yeah, let's do it. And right now this is like the identity, but they wanted a creative partner, right? It's not like I am working now under an employer. I am working through my own LLC, my business, with them. And so that's another conversation we'll have later on in the semester is like, how you got to work as a freelancer in America. How do you protect yourself? How do you build a business, right? I am not a businessman. I am an artist, but I have looked into how the system works, and yes, like I'm an immigrant and my parents don't know shit about American stuff, so I had to do that stuff for myself, right? So I'm going to talk about that at some point. But this is the logo that I came up with. It is reminiscent of protest signage from the 60s where, well, we'll get into it. And it has like moving energy, right? And the most iconic part of this identity is that it's based off of films from the 60s. And that's why it was important to include the film strip. So I'm going to tell you how I got there. Because, right, this might look pretty, but I didn't start here. It started with doodles. And then every week I met with them and I'm like, what do you think of my doodles? And then we kind of went from there. And this is how I kind of imagine it would look like as posters. These are not actual posters. This is me just taking phrases that they told me and just typing them out and collaging stuff and throwing it around. But then they get an idea. When they saw this, they were like, oh, this is how it could show up on social media. This is how it could show up as lesson plans. They saw my vision come together, and they could imagine infinite iterations of this because I gave them a complete picture. So let's go step by step through the process because it's not a perfect process. So let's start off with the first draft. Where is this? First draft on computer. That's useful. Projects, Bazaar, LMNO, YGTM, identity. Okay. First. Also, during every step of the way, I am taking photos of my sketchbook. I am taking photos of me doing whatever it is, right? I'm trying to incorporate in these meetings and be like, yo, this is what I'm up to. Because if I just show this, they're all going to think, wow, you're great at drawing, Leon. No, I'm not. I had to do this before I even got to something, right? I'm like, hey, look, I jammed my printer and I ripped it out. Like, if you present yourself as something perfect, they're going to expect perfect. I am saying, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll figure it along the way, so trust me. So next time, I don't got to even take the time to make these photos, because they're not even going to wonder, what is Leon up to? They know I'm up to some shit, you know? Okay, so first draft. Our first meeting was our discovery meeting, I call it, where I call it like a brand therapy session. I'm like, how do you feel? Why do you feel the way you feel? What are your organization's values? What do you prioritize? Who do you want to empower? Who do you want to speak to? And then I wrote down some bullet points. These people, they're about compassion, empowerment, awareness, education, wellness, community, humanity, social, together, into the light, understanding, right? I am very focused on the conversation, and this stuff I'm just jotting down as I'm speaking. I'm not worried about, okay, does this make sense? Let me write a paragraph. I'm literally jotting down things that they're saying, words that they're saying. Because then I'll show them back to this, and they'll be like, wow, Leon actually listened to me. And that is part of the trust. That is part of the soft skills. Notes, right? I'm going from bullet points to then doodles. And then I'm like, oh, so bullet points, let's think about protest signage. We have a sign, we have a stick. Maybe the sign itself is the tool, and then stick could be representative of the human power, right? I'm just kind of pulling bullshit out of my brain and trying to associate words with visuals. And then I'm like, oh, handwritten type, 2 or 3 displays. I'm not expecting myself to come up with ideas. I'm just writing down spur of the moment things, and eventually they'll make sense. They're puzzle pieces. And then I'm like, oh, cool. So then I was like, okay, let's start off thinking about, we're talking about protests, and we're talking about the signage. A lot of the signage has like these paint strokes behind one word to kind of highlight that, right? And then I'm like, okay, but people making these protest signs are not designers. They're people using whatever materials they got to just put the word out. They're not worried about what does the end result look like. They're worried about the message. So then I'm like, what do they use? They use paint. So maybe I could think about the materiality of paint strokes. Maybe that is a certain texture. You know, they're using markers, like they're grabbing a Sharpie from the desk and bloop. So marker felt, that's a cool texture. Maybe that says something. Tape pieces, I don't know, they're taping shit together, you know. Maybe that is something cool I could like put on something and scan into the computer. And so I worked out my technical parameters. What do I got to include in my identity, right? I got to consider imagery, colors, layout, sound, animation, and typography, right? The first filter is like, I decided, okay, this should be inspired by civil rights. Or I didn't decide that. I listened to what they said. They were like, think about Martin Luther King. Think about the Black Panthers. Think about civil rights movements. All right. And then the filter that it has to go through was, it has to be digestible for, I don't even know what that says, for like families, right? They were like, this has got to be like protest, this has got to be radical, but it's got to be, you go to Thanksgiving and have a conversation with the family, that's tense, right? How can we frame this radical thinking in a way where a mother and a daughter can have a conversation, where it's a family conversation, right? So it's got to be radical, but it has to be digestible. So these are the two design filters I kind of brought it through. And so as a designer, you're hearing what is the actual context and how can I form my design to be appropriate for the audience. So I did a bunch of research, a bunch of street photography. So, well, actually, I started out back here, looking at civil rights movements in the 60s. Like, these photos are so powerful. This is where I got my inspiration from, right? They just grabbed whatever font they had on their Windows computer and slapped it on a piece of paper. And so I'm looking back at civil rights times back in the 60s, and then I'm also looking at Baltimore Uprising, like recent contemporary civil rights movements. And so I remember being at MICA and then being in my dorm. Founders Green was shut down, and we had police, we had the army throughout the city, and it was illegal to step outside. But we climbed on top of the roof of Founders Green, and there was helicopters and shit. It was terrifying, and there was fires everywhere. Like, because I laid these links, I had this emotional connection. And then I was looking at I remember hanging out with my friends who were going to go to the protests and helping them make the signs. And so I was like, so the first thing I did is I looked at these images for 20 minutes and just cried. And because I'm so emotionally invested, I was like, all right, I'm hype. I'm good. You know, we're going. And so then I'm like, then I went to the hardware store, and like, what did we grab in the hardware store? I grabbed the cheapest paper I could find, college-ruled paper. I grabbed whatever materials I could find, and then I started doodling. I started sketching. I started mark making. I'm like, people have underlines on their signage, right? They have scribbles and stuff, black and white usually, or black and red. What does that look like when that's all interacting, right? If I'm using yellow as a color, it's not to write something. You can't see yellow, but it might be good for like a background, right? And then what does that look like with scribbles over top that are both black and the other red? And then I was like, what marks did people use to emphasize words, right? They underlined words, they emphasized things. And these marks are also what teachers use to grade papers, right? So I'm thinking, what is the protest filter? What is the teacher filter, right? Yes, protest, but also you got 100, A+, star, you know? So just started doodling. I also have this really cool like charcoal paper, and charcoal paper has this like really cool thick texture. And when you write on it, it shows through whatever, you know, you're writing on it. So I was like, maybe that's cool. And then I was looking for specific type references from back in the day. Martin Luther King publication. And this first meeting, I should not have even presented a logo. Like, okay, cool, whatever, but everyone does this, all right? The fist, that's obvious. That is my first idea. But it was just important for me to get that out there, right? Because then I could go to the meeting and they're like, no. And then because I'm like, you're right, I don't like it either, let's change it. Then they're like, okay, this dude listens, he responds to me, right? So even if you're not happy with an idea, it's not about that. It's about the conversation you're about to have with them, about the fact that you know they're not going to like it, and knowing that you're going to be like, okay, you're right, like validating them will build that trust. And then I just started doing the painting thing. You know how I showed you this? I went to the hardware store. I grabbed a little roller and I just started painting on that ruled paper that I bought. And so eventually I'm like, what if I did some painting and then I printed over top of it and then I slapped some stickers on it? I just kept experimenting, keeping it fun, keeping it animated. And like, because I also want to have a good time making this. I'm not going to have a good time if I'm making something and then putting it in Illustrator and like, wow, it's a pretty logo. That's not fun to me. So incorporate your creative process into whatever you make so that when somebody hires you to do something, if you're working for an employer or you're freelancing, you have to go through this process. Keep it fun. Okay, identity, approach. Okay, and so this is my first iteration of stuff. I just would like jam the printer, and then I would fold and rip the paper, and then first I would paint, then I would put it in the printer, and then after that I would make red marks on it, you know, and I'm just kind of starting to layer my ideas. And so I just used photos that I took like in Amsterdam or wherever. I'm always taking photos. So I'm like also giving them an idea of the kind of imagery. So like I love stark black and white imagery. When you look at civil rights imagery or street photography from back then, that's the style. And so what does it look like when after I do all the printing and the ripping and the marking, I then fold over a side of the thing, right? And then I scan it. Like, and I'm getting all of these interesting textures. So these are the photos I took like years ago. Okay, and then my second draft I actually have right here. Okay, so they loved where I was going. They were tearing up. They were like, "Oh, we love this." I'm like, I know. But then I showed them the logo, and they're like, "Oh, this sucks." And I'm like, "I know." So then I was like, I got to go back and do some more research. And I was like, I can't sit behind the computer for more than 10 minutes. I can't sit still. I'm not going to Google. I'm going to go to the library. Because also the library is what you had back in the day. You didn't have Google. You had the library. It's not that that's more valuable to the situation. It's that that put me in the emotional mindset of I am here physically. I am like involving myself into the creation of this, right? So I start researching. I go to the library and I get this book called Making the Movement. How activists fought for civil rights with buttons, flyers, pins, and posters, right? Literal. Cool. A million designers already wrote on this stuff. People have been doing this, right? What I'm doing is nothing new. I'm just presenting it in a different way for one organization who has a specific goal in mind. And so I was reading about the call and response as a musical structure made up of two phrases that form a rhythmic dialogue, right? I want to incorporate rhythm and dialogue and like feedback into my identity somehow. Improvisation, collaboration, community, cohesion, right? It's not like I make a logo and I'm like, I know what I'm doing and I have the answer. It is like, I am presenting this thing 1 week, getting the community's feedback. And then I am revising. It's okay to be like, I don't know what I'm doing, because I do not. Like, I am just doing the art thing. So then I started looking at the Black Panthers. They were, design-wise, most well-known for their publication. And so here we have it. We got that stark black and white imagery, right? We're presenting people as like these powerful figures. That's empowering. We have strict color palettes. We have these cool blocky layouts, right? I'm getting a feel for what design existed back then. And then I was looking at contemporary kind of poetry and books that people wrote for activism. And so And We Rise by Erica Martin is just a book I found on the shelf. And it has these beautiful typographic compositions, right? Here is like all of these eclectic fonts. And that's the nature of protest signage, is everybody's supposed to be able to make them. It's not typographers who are like, let me think about what kind of font do I want. No, it is like, what is jarring? What catches your attention, right? They're incorporating all of that together. A lot of times in like branding or corporate settings, you're like, use 1 or 2 fonts. No, I'm like, use 2 or 3 fonts. The eclectic nature of applying that adds character, and that is unique. and just look at how the type here is laid out, right? It's not just to be read, it's also to be, it's like the person is performing the poetry for you and you're reading it in the way that they told it. This is such a jarring composition, right? Gets you in the feels. And then I was thinking about, because they were also like, okay, we also want to incorporate stuff about voting, because ultimately that is how you have power, is how is your voice heard? How can you vote? Historically, black women have not been able to vote because their voices have been suppressed, right? To be able to vote, you needed to be literate. They were intentionally made not to be literate, right? It is systemic. It is not just you can or can't vote. They pretend like it's all equal, right? But they don't give you the same resources. So voting, and I was thinking about UX, like user experience. How do people make decisions together, communally? How can we incorporate that into the identity? So people use sticky notes like we do. You know, you just kind of paste whatever shit you do on the wall and then circle it, and you're like, okay, let's go with that idea. Let's vote on it. And so then I'm like, maybe some of these shapes, being reminiscent of like teaching and like stuff you find in an office that you can use as protest signage, maybe some of those forms can make it into the identity. And then I was looking at some voting stuff specifically. Like we got colors, the American flag colors. You know, we have this like grungy textural feel. We have the really eclectic pairing of all these different fonts. That's cool. And it's not like I'm getting these books and actually reading them. I do not read text. I read images. Like I'm just flipping to a page and I'm like, what do I see? What are things that I recognize? And then I was like, how do they teach this stuff to kids in school? I like this. They have like ruled paper. You know, they're circling things, outlining things. These are doodles I used to make in math class. Like, I'm not paying attention. I'm going to draw a squid. Like, so cool. And then so that's middle school. This is like elementary school. How do they teach something so complicated, but filter it in a way that everybody can understand it, right? Here it's about voting on a class pet. That's sick. That's something kids care about. Kids don't care about government. They care about, am I going to see this turtle tomorrow or not? You know, they care about, where's Aquila? And so look at these textures. Look at these scribbles. Just fueling my brain with inspiration. My brain is not logical. It doesn't go, okay, let us do this and then that. It is like, let me just get a feel, and then over the next coming weeks, subconsciously, I'm going to start being in the shower like, oh shit, this is a good idea. You know, just write whatever comes to mind, and at the end, you'll piece it together. And so this is direct inspiration from the documentaries. These two are screenshots from the documentaries. This is Lucy filming one of the documentaries. Sweet old lady. And every week when I met with like the people, I would give them prompts. Like, I am a teacher. That's what I do. I'm like, okay, now take my ideas and you doodle. You scribble. It's got to be back and forth. There's got to be community involvement involved, right? Because if people feel like they're involved in the process, then they're excited about it. You know, everybody was doodling, and I'm like, make circles, like, make arrows, blah, blah, blah. You know, and then something that kept on coming back was this film strip. The old film strip with, like, the sprockets in them. And then I was looking at design identities. Like, I would get photos of doodles people would make at, like, 1 a.m. They just texted me, like, oh, shit, boop, 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 boop. You know, and then I saved it on my phone and I presented it back to them. It's a back and forth. You're not, yeah. And then I'm linking to all of these like other examples and stuff, but I'm just trying to get through it. And then this was very significant. People actually had that film strip. Like, I am 28. I don't have this in my house, but they do. They're old. They know the shit. They've been doing this shit. So they started gluing it on there. I'm like, wow, we are getting somewhere. And they're layering, and like, they said, they were like, we're in an art class. Because I was like, okay, doodle. Like, take these layers and then do your thing. And then so, one of my favorite teachers here at Micah, who used to be here, was Keel. And he was like the motion designer. He was the only one teaching motion design when I was in school. So I was hype. And he's been working on this. He's like a programmer and designer person. And he's worked on this tool called Space Type Generator that's free, that's online. And you just enter in text and it moves and it's interactive. And he's always iterating on it. But I was like, that's perfect to get my brain thinking about how does the type actually come together. So I made this cool composition. And people were thinking about the colors. I'm like, highlight stuff. So like, highlight, highlight, highlight. And then I was bringing it into like a more design context. I'm like, okay, so now we have all of these ideas. How can I funnel it down? And so there was this motion identity that we got a moving logo, right? The logo itself extends and becomes a sign. And it's like an architecture firm or, I don't know, interior design. But you started having all of these interlocking pieces that were almost like individually drawn shapes that then come together to form this like room, this like floor plan. So I was like, that's cool. Because from the start, they were like, we need a motion designer first. But we also need someone who can stay organized and design, and we need a creative partner. And so like, that's cool. That gets the juices flowing. Ooh, and then they love this. Then we had illustrations over top of the designs. I'm like, and this is where we can hire artists from the community, and we can commission them to make illustrations depending on what we're doing. And we can just slap that on top of what I'm doing, right? I told them, like, the design I make should be invisible so that you are empowered to use it to create. It should be a guide for you. It should be something that vibes with you. And then we have these cute little icons that are all moving and bopping. And so more motion identity stuff. This one's more relevant to their cause. This is building diversity. I showed you this before, right? But we have all of these pieces that are like bloop, 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 and the compositions are changing, and it's like flexible. And seeing this, they're like, okay, wow, I understand now, because they're not designers. They think logo, they think, okay, let's make a fist. They think icons are logos, right? And yes, icons are logos, but a logo is one tiny puzzle piece of a brand identity. And a brand identity guide should consider all of these avenues, depending on what you know the applications will be. Ooh, and this really inspired me. Like, you had these stickers that were flying on and gluing on there. I'm like, maybe that can inform my physical process. And then we had this, where we're showing video footage through the logo, moving back and forth. And then I started iterating on some mark. So I grabbed a giant sketch pad, the same charcoal pad that I was doing the painting on, and then I was like, okay, let's start out with their name, their acronym, You Got to Move. What do the counter spaces of that look like? Can I take that down and just use those shapes to make something cool? And then I was like, oh, this mark is significant. This was in that book that taught middle schoolers about history and stuff. And it was also like, I started identifying forms that I liked, and then I got here, I really liked it, but it started looking to be a little bit like 90s, like poppy, whatever. I thought it was cool, but maybe not relevant for the context. So I kept exploring, and then I started redrawing YGTM, and I just kept iterating on that, not thinking necessarily about why am I drawing this? I was just scribbling, and eventually I was like, okay, but it's got to work in a large context and in a square context. So then I was like, okay, and they loved arrows. So what if I make all the letters arrows? Bloop, bloop, bloop. And then what if I make some scribbles? And eventually I was like, okay, now let's apply these ideas to the colors that I decided, to the materials that I wanted to use. And so I really liked this. I was really vibing with this, right? It's abstract enough where it's not literal, but it does give enough context so you understand how the name is inspired by the drawings, right? And so this was my first iteration. And at first, I was like, these are two different directions. But Leon knows that they're going to like all of them. So I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, let's combine them. But I did that after they were like, let's combine them. I'm like, that's a great idea, Martha. You know, like, incorporate them. And they're going to be very thankful for it. So I was somewhere here, right? I got a logo together. It's kind of vibing with what I got. But they were like, okay, paint mark is cool, but is it relevant, right? And then, so anyway, I had another 3 weeks. So we were iterating. Final draft. Oh, so I just had, and so that was my second draft, and this was the final draft. Oh, I'll show you the Illustrator file. So then I was like, cool. This is what I got. This is what I showed them. And then I would drag it out, copy it, make a change, drag another out. Don't delete stuff. I have this awful perfectionist tendency to be like, it's got to be perfect. And then I end up deleting shit. But if you show them the process, like they said, they felt like they were in art class because I was showing them my doodles. I was making the conversation about art, not about design, expectation, product. We will fall into that trap. You work a full-time job, it's going to be like, okay, what did you do today? What did you finish? Not going to be like, what colors did you choose? Like, that's the conversation I care about. But then I was like, okay, cool, the film strip is the most significant thing here. So I image traced it on Illustrator, right? And this is what I came up with. Cool. And instead of the paint thing, I started putting that behind the text. And then I just kept doodling. I was like, ooh, maybe the arrow can be part of the Y, and then the V can be the triangle. And then I was like, ooh, this is looking like 90s VHS cover that used to be in my room. I'm like, ooh, nice. Now we get a film strip. I'm like, it's a little too detailed for a logo. Maybe I can simplify it. So I was getting somewhere. I'm like, but how do I keep that folding, that organic hands-on nature? And then I was like, okay, instead of a T, maybe I can make that a scribble. So then I was like, ooh, scribbling. And then I just kept playing. I'm literally just bloop, dragging and dropping, right? And I'm like, what if the sprockets have arrows? What if the whole thing is an arrow? I'm just jumping from idea to idea, right? I don't have to overthink it. I've already been thinking. I've been researching. It's subconscious at this point. I'm emotionally invested. And then I get to this. I'm like, okay, this is the shit. This is cool, right? I got something that works on our Instagram. It's a little square. I got something that works on a giant banner on a billboard. And I don't always start that way. But you always got to make sure things work in black and white. That is the priority. Because then you're focusing formally. It's going to make sure to work on all contexts, right? I know I started with color here, but always test it. And then I was like, okay, this kind of and then I was analytically picking it apart, right? Because you're working with people who maybe are not that creatively oriented, but they are logically oriented, how do you speak their language? This film strip references documentary. This paper perforation references education. This forward momentum is empowerment, like in our values. And then I was looking at the imagery that they sent me, right? This is the cover of the documentary. It's a beautiful art piece. And then we had some screenshots. And then there was an illustrator that made illustrations for them based off of their movie. How do we incorporate that? And so then I was like, oh, cool. What if we show the images through the logo? Just like that building diversity design stuff, they were showing images through the marks. And so that's what I showed them. And they're like, we love it. This is amazing. But it looks like a sled. I'm like, damn, you're right. It does look like a sled. How do we make this into a film strip And then literally on the meeting, I was screen sharing, and I just doodled this shit. Like, I was just like, how can we make this into they're like, maybe we just need some more sprockets, you know? Like, I'm not even thinking about the final design yet. I'm just thinking, how do we indicate something, right? If you live doodle like this, you're going to blow people away, right? This is easy. You're like, Leon, you can't draw. Okay, but neither can they, okay? And you're doing it live. You're painting in front of them. And so this was the first iteration, and then this is the, well, somewhere is the final iteration. But then I started playing with the pattern, and I was like, it would be sick if these were stickers. What if I first chose paper? Well, first I designed compositions with type and images, and then I took my yellow ruled paper, and then maybe I folded it, and then I put that through the printer, so it prints over top of this thing, and it has folds on it. Some of the image will be on the fold. It'll look really screwed up. And then I was like, what if after that I glue stickers on it, like these stickers? I made these sticker sheets. And then after that, I added red marker, and then I scanned it in. Layers. And so yeah, this is where I ended up. This is the final mark. You gotta move. I did not know I was going to make this before I made it. Somebody's like, make a logo. I'm not like, okay, I got it. I just went through the emotional process of making art, and eventually, because I'm also a designer, I put logic to it. And then I was like, okay, let's make the brand guideline and do the type thing. So this is really, I'm really feeling this. They were loving it. And so these were the compositions that I printed onto like the folded and ripped paper, and eventually they looked like this. And these were phrases they came up with. They had in a Word doc somewhere. They just spur of the moment came up with phrases, and I incorporated those. And so what's fun is because I made it such an organic process, I don't have to be like, oh, I have to make this perfect underline. I literally am like, you know, my imperfectness in their world is perfect. They only see the end result. I didn't know I was going to make this, but I made it about my process. I involved them so much that they trusted me to do it. And, okay, brand guideline. Then I made a brand guideline. I haven't finished this shit. I just put the pieces together. I'm like, okay, let's put a printer on some folded paper. I made all the folded paper kind of like arrows looking, right? I called it a creative guideline for resistance. Table of contents, values, logos, typography, colors, right? I did not think about it, what are their values? What are the logos? In the shower one day, I thought of the typography. Next week, I thought of the colors. You know, it's like, these are not linear thoughts. And then I was like, okay, cool. It's a guideline for designers, but how do I make it a guideline for everyone, for teachers, right? So I just go through the process like I just showed you all, whether the logo marks, right? More space, less space, what does that look like? If you're just on Instagram or you have a little favicon icon up here in Figma, what does that look like? Okay, and then I made the actual guide, how anyone could do this. So I'm like, this was like crafts. This is so much fun. Supplies, get your supplies. Get yellow college ruled paper, blank sheets, and sticker sheets. And then get scissors, red Sharpie, highlighter, computer, printer. And then with every part of the process, I took a photo with this little camera. Bloop. First step, prep. Get your stickers. It's likely they're just going to print off a bunch of stickers, right? But I printed them myself. And then make the designs. If you have Excel or if you have Paint, I don't care. It doesn't matter. You don't need Adobe programs to make a design, right? These fonts are fonts that everybody has on their computer already. And then the next step is craft it. So start ripping stuff and making things look arrow-like and start layering that on paper. And then put that layered stuff, run it through the printer. And then slap some stickers on it. And I just added this, but add those arrows and markings. And then at the end, this is what you get. Cohesive. It's already moving. Like, I just need to put in the labor of using the After Effects, but I already know how it's moving. It's in my brain. And so future considerations. This is me selling them on future shit. I'm like, oh, well, now you need me. We got to think about collateral. We got to think about like business cards, like letterheads. We got to think about animation. We got to think about web stuff, like your website. We got to think about social media, marketing, whatever. In their head now, I am the only one who can do this. Even though I've made it about them, I've made a guideline, and I specifically said, you can kick me off the team and you can still do it. They were like, Leon, please don't leave. I'm like, I win. Like, say no. Somebody's like, can you make me a logo? No, I can't. But please, you know, like, make them want you. Play the game. You need to make a living doing this. And then final thing is I made some lesson plans. Right? They're teachers. They're actually trying to make this. So I'm like, cool. I turned off my brain at this point, and I just turned on my craft brain. I turned off my design brain, because I was like, I already got the process documented. So I used this guideline. It was for me. It was not for them. I told them it was for them. It was really for me. And then I was like, okay. They gave me a Word document, and then I just started ripping apart all the fonts. And I started ripping paper and scanning it. And each page has an image, an icon, and some red marks, right? I'm consistently finding patterns that I can just apply to each page. And so once you've decided those patterns for your logo animation, now your style frames will come together, because you already got all the pieces, you just got to compose them. I did this. The lady wasn't paying me. She wasn't emailing me back, so I was resisting. I was like, I'm just going to hold off till the very last day. And that was like a day before class. I spent 12 hours doing this shit. But I knew I could do it in 12 hours because I did the hard part, the identity stuff. Now we just got to make something. Okay, cool. That is all. Thank you for watching. Now, it's your turn. And so, it is activity time. So, you can do an activity. I will also set up the Xbox. You can also do your own thing. You can also go, do your thing. But we're thinking about systems, the puzzle pieces, and we're thinking about transitions. Now that we're also thinking about animation, how do we get from point A to point C? What is B? That is your transition. So create an outline of your skills and values that you wish to highlight in your brand animation. If you were here at the end of last class, we did some exercises where we just threw out some words, right? I like shoveling dirt, and I like making sandcastles. Cool. Awesome. And then so draw 3 storyboards showing the beginning, middle transition, and end of your logo animation. And so this is kind of the linear process, right? This is very neurotypical. This is how people think that you design stuff, right? Oh, we're going to make a logo first. Then we're going to do some planning, make storyboards. Then we're going to think about transitions. And then we're going to do style frames in a perfect world, right? But what I like to do is I like to work backwards. So yeah, I know overall I got to have a beginning, a transition, and my end. These are my 3 post-it notes or wherever you're drawing your storyboards. But maybe we're working backwards. What if we just start doodling? I like making sandcastles and I like hiking. I'm going to draw some boots. I'm going to draw a sandcastle. I'm going to draw a shovel. And then eventually you're like, those could be cool animating together in this way. And then eventually at the end of whatever, how long time we have, you're like, okay, this could be my logo. The logo is not the priority. The logo is an end result, right? If it comes to you, it comes to you. In my head, I was like, okay, fist icon. That is like uprising. But that was one iteration. So okay, here's some questions. Here's some structure, right? One last thing I wanted to show you, then I'll shut up, is this. a system that is like synthesized music. They're correlating sound effects to visuals.
Synthesizers are strange and magical machines. They may look complicated, but the sounds they make are built from relatively simple parts. It all starts with an electrical signal that gets translated into sound. The basic tone of this sound is a repeating waveform generated by something called an oscillator. The shape of this wave determines what it sounds like. The timbre can be changed with a filter, which cuts out certain frequencies. The shape of a note can be altered by an envelope. An LFO, or low-frequency oscillator, is like the oscillator, but slower and too low to hear. It can be used to control things like the pitch, or the filter, or the volume. These four parts make a complete synthesizer. From here, the possibilities are endless. To make your own synth music, start simple. Then, just follow your curiosity.
You are the synth, the synthesizer. You are the magician making these cool puzzle pieces and then bringing them together.